The small town of Mapleton sat nestled against the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place where American flags decorated front porches year-round, and Memorial Day was treated with the reverence of Christmas. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where high school football games drew the entire community, and where serving in the military was considered not just a career choice but a family tradition. For Master Sergeant Catherine, Kate Mitchell, Mapleton had always been home, even during her 20 years of service in the Army. Now, at 42, she was back for good, having retired after her final tour in Afghanistan left her with a titanium rod in her left leg and enough combat experience to last several lifetimes. On this crisp October morning, Kate stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. Her modest ranch house at the edge of town had been her sanctuary since returning 6 months ago. The transition to civilian life hadn't been easy, especially in a town where everyone remembered her as little Katie Mitchell, the headstrong tomboy who'd stunned the community by enlisting instead of settling down like most Mapleton girls. The ringing phone interrupted her morning ritual. She recognized the number, Colonel James Winters, her former commanding officer and mentor. "Mitchell," she answered, military habits still dictating her phone etiquette. "Kate," the colonel's usually strong voice sounded tired. "I'm afraid I have bad news. Major Robert Adams passed away yesterday." Kate lowered her coffee mug to the counter, a hollow feeling spreading in her chest. Major Adams had been her first platoon leader when she joined the Army, a fair-minded officer who'd treated her with respect when many others hadn't. "What happened?" she asked, her voice steady despite the shock. "Heart attack, unexpected. The funeral's tomorrow at Arlington. I know it's short notice, but I thought you'd want to know." "I'll be there," Kate replied without hesitation. "Thank you for calling, sir." After hanging up, Kate moved to her bedroom closet where her dress uniform hung, perfectly pressed and maintained despite her retirement. Major Adams deserved to be honored properly, and despite the 3-hour drive to Arlington, there was no question she would attend. The next morning found Kate navigating the crowded parking lot at Arlington National Cemetery, leaning slightly on her cane as she made her way toward the funeral site. Her dress uniform felt both familiar and strange, a reminder of the life she'd lived and the identity she'd forged through years of service and sacrifice. As she approached the gathering crowd, Kate noticed several familiar faces, fellow soldiers who had served with Adams over his 30-year career. Most nodded in recognition, though few approached her directly. Kate had always been something of an outsider, even among those who respected her service record. Being one of the few women in combat roles during much of her career had created a distance that never quite disappeared. "Well, look who's here," came a voice from behind her. "Mitchell the Missile, back from retirement." Kate turned to find Captain David Wilson, a fellow officer who had never bothered to hide his disdain for women in combat positions. His smirk hadn't changed since she'd last seen him 5 years ago. "Captain Wilson," she acknowledged coolly. "I'm surprised to see you. I didn't realize you knew Major Adams well." Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The Major and I served together in his last posting at Fort Bragg. Unlike some, I didn't need special treatment to earn my place in his unit." The implication was clear. The old accusation that Kate had advanced through favoritism rather than merit, despite her multiple combat decorations and exemplary record. 20 years of service and a Purple Heart hardly qualifies as special treatment, Kate replied evenly, refusing to let him provoke her at a funeral of all places. "If you'll excuse me, I'd like to pay my respects." She moved away before he could respond, making her way toward the front where the Major's family was gathered. Adam's wife, Eleanor, spotted her and rose to embrace her. "Kate, thank you for coming," Eleanor said warmly. "Robert always spoke so highly of you." "He was a good man," Kate replied, genuinely moved by the widow's greeting. "One of the finest officers I ever served under." As they spoke, Kate noticed an elderly man approaching the family section. He moved slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, his weathered face lined with grief. Though dressed in a simple but well-worn suit rather than a uniform, something about his bearing marked him as military. 2 young guards stationed at the family section stepped forward, intercepting him before he could reach the front row. "I'm sorry, sir, but this area is reserved for family and invited guests," one guard said, his tone polite but firm. Please, the old man's voice quavered slightly. I served with Bobby in Vietnam. I've come all the way from Oregon. I just want to pay my respects to his family. The second guard shook his head. I understand, sir, but we have strict protocols for these ceremonies. Without proper credentials or family confirmation, we can't allow access to the restricted seating. Kate watched as the elderly man's shoulders slumped. He nodded in resignation, too proud to argue further, and began to turn away. Without thinking, Kate stepped forward. Excuse me, she addressed the guards. This gentleman is with me. Major Adams would have wanted him here. Both guards turned to her, taking in her decorated uniform and the authority in her voice. Ma'am, with all due respect, we haven't been informed of any additional guests, the first guard replied, his tone now carrying a hint of condescension. And you are? Master Sergeant Catherine Mitchell, retired. I served under Major Adams in Afghanistan. The guards exchanged glances. I'm sorry, Sergeant, the second one said, emphasizing her lower rank, but without proper authorization we can't make exceptions. Perhaps the gentleman can observe from the general seating area. Kate felt a familiar frustration rising. Even here, even after 20 years of service and numerous combat deployments, she was being dismissed. She saw Wilson watching from nearby, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Before she could respond, Eleanor Adams approached. Is there a problem? Mrs. Adams, Kate began, this gentleman served with your husband in Vietnam. He's traveled across the country to be here. The elderly man straightened slightly. Name's Frank Donnelly, ma'am. I was a radio operator in your husband's first platoon. I wouldn't want to impose. Eleanor's face softened. Mr. Donnelly, of course you're welcome. Robert kept a photograph of his Vietnam unit on his desk until the day he retired. The guards stepped aside, properly chastened, as Eleanor led Frank to a seat in the family section. As they passed, Frank gave Kate a grateful nod, his eyes communicating a deeper understanding, two soldiers who knew what it meant to be underestimated and overlooked. As Kate took her own seat, she noticed Wilson still watching her, his expression now hardened with displeasure at her small victory. Others, too, were observing her with varying expressions, curiosity, resentment, and in a few cases, respect. The ceremony began with the precision and dignity befitting a decorated officer's final farewell. As the chaplain spoke of service and sacrifice, Kate's mind drifted to her own experiences under Major Adams' command, how he had trusted her judgment in the field when others questioned her capabilities, how he had recommended her for advancement based solely on her performance rather than any quota or policy. What Kate didn't realize, as she sat remembering the officer who had helped shape her career, was that this funeral would become a turning point in her post-military life. The connections rekindled, and the truths revealed over the next 24 hours would challenge everything she thought she knew about her service, her standing among her peers, and the true legacy of Major Robert Adams. The funeral procession wound its solemn way through Arlington's hallowed grounds, hundreds of boots and dress shoes moving in measured steps across the immaculate lawns. Kate walked among them, her gait steady despite the old injury that sometimes flared in cold weather. She had positioned herself near Frank Donnelly, the elderly Vietnam veteran, who seemed grateful for the company. The Major saved my life, you know, Frank said quietly as they walked. Pulled me out of a rice paddy under heavy fire after our helicopter went down, never even mentioned it in his reports. Kate nodded. That sounds like him. He always said leadership wasn't about recognition, it was about making sure everyone came home. Frank studied her uniform with knowing eyes. Those aren't decorations they hand out for desk duty, Sergeant. Master Sergeant, she corrected automatically, then smiled. Sorry, force of habit, and no, they weren't for desk duty. Combat? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Frank's weathered face broke into a small smile. Times have changed since my day. For the better, I'd say. You must have some stories. Before Kate could respond, Captain Wilson appeared beside them, inserting himself into the conversation with practiced ease. Don't let Mitchell fool you with the humble routine, he said, his voice carrying just enough for nearby mourners to hear. She's got quite the reputation, our very own G.I. Jane. Kate felt her jaw tighten but kept her expression neutral. I was just doing my job, same as any soldier. Of course you were, Wilson replied, his tone making the words sound like anything but agreement. Though it's interesting how you always ended up in Major Adams' command. Some might call that fortunate placement. The implication was clear and ugly, suggesting her relationship with Adams had been improper, or that she had received special treatment because of her gender. Frank Donnelly looked between them, his eyes narrowing at Wilson. "Son, I've known enough fine soldiers to spot one, regardless of what uniform they wear, and I've known enough blowhards to spot those two." Wilson's face flushed, but before he could retort, they reached the graveside. The conversation ended as they took their positions for the final ceremony. The military honors unfolded with precision. The flag-draped casket, the rifle salute, the solemn playing of taps that never failed to bring a lump to Kate's throat. As the honor guard folded the flag into its tight triangle, she stood at attention, her mind filled with memories of the officers and friends she had said goodbye to over the years. After the flag was presented to Eleanor Adams, the formal ceremony concluded. People began to move toward the reception area, where the family would receive condolences. Kate lingered at the graveside, waiting until most had departed before approaching the casket to pay her final respects. As she stood there, a voice behind her spoke quietly. "He thought very highly of you, you know." Kate turned to find Colonel James Winters, her former commanding officer. In his mid-60s now, Winters still carried himself with the straight-backed posture of a career officer. "The feeling was mutual, sir," Kate replied. "Major Adams was one of the best." Winters nodded, his gaze moving past her to the departing mourners. "I notice Wilson's still the same charming individual." Kate couldn't help a small smile. The colonel had always had a gift for understatement. "Some things never change." "And some things do," he countered, turning back to her. "Which is actually why I wanted to speak with you. Do you have plans this evening?" Kate raised an eyebrow. "Just the drive back to Mapleton." "I'd like you to join me for dinner first. There's something important I need to discuss with you, about Adams and about your service record." The seriousness in his tone gave Kate pause. "Is something wrong, sir?" "Not wrong," Winters replied carefully, "but there are things you should know, things Adams wanted you to know eventually." He handed her a business card with an address written on the back. 7 o'clock, it's a private dining room, we won't be disturbed." Curiosity piqued, Kate nodded. "I'll be there, sir." The reception was held at the Officers' Club, a handsome brick building where generations of military personnel had gathered to celebrate promotions, deployments, and retirements, and to mourn their fallen comrades. Kate moved through the crowded rooms, exchanging greetings with former colleagues and meeting others who had served with Adams in units before her time. She was speaking with one of Adams' former lieutenants when she noticed a commotion near the entrance. Frank Donnelly had arrived, only to be stopped by the same two guards from the funeral service. "I'm sorry, sir," one was saying, loudly enough for nearby conversations to falter. "This reception is for military personnel and invited guests only." Frank stood his ground, dignity evident in his stance despite his age. "Mrs. Adams invited me personally. I served with the major in Vietnam." "Without proper credentials, we can't allow access," the second guard insisted. "Security protocols." Kate excused herself and moved toward the entrance, noticing that several others were watching the exchange with discomfort, but making no move to intervene. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority of her rank and experience. The first guard turned, recognizing her from earlier. His expression tightened. "This is a military matter, ma'am. We're simply following protocol." "It's a reception to honor Major Adams," Kate corrected firmly. "And this man was personally invited by Mrs. Adams. He served with the major in Vietnam and traveled across the country to be here." "Without proper identification," the guard began. "His identification," Kate interrupted, her patience wearing thin, "is the combat infantry badge he earned alongside Major Adams 50 years ago. His credentials are the scars he likely still carries from a war most of us only read about in history books." Others were watching now, the scene drawing attention from throughout the reception. Kate saw Wilson observing from nearby, clearly enjoying her confrontation with authority. "Regulations are clear," the second guard insisted, though with less conviction. "We can't make exceptions." Kate was about to respond when a new voice entered the conversation. Eleanor Adams, approaching with concern evident on her face. "Mr. Donnelly, is everything all right?" she asked, then looked to the guards. "Is there a problem?" The first guard straightened. "Ma'am, we're just following security protocols for military functions." Elinor's expression hardened slightly. "This isn't just a military function, it's my husband's memorial. Mr. Donnelly is here at my personal invitation, as is Master Sergeant Mitchell." The mention of Kate's rank was deliberate, reminding the guards of the respect due to a decorated veteran. "Of course, Mrs. Adams," the guard conceded. "We apologize for any confusion." As the guard stepped aside, Elinor took Frank's arm. "Please come in. There are several of Robert's Vietnam colleagues who would be honored to meet you." As they moved past, Frank gave Kate a small nod of thanks. She returned it, aware of the eyes following her, some approving, others less so. Wilson materialized at her side, his voice pitched for her ears only. "Still fighting battles that don't need fighting, Mitchell. Some things never change." "And some people never learn," she replied evenly. "Respect isn't just about rank, Wilson. It's about recognizing service and sacrifice, regardless of when or how it was given." "How poetic," he scoffed. "I'm sure that philosophy helped when you were passed over for promotion to sergeant major. Oh, wait, that was because of your injury, wasn't it? Not because some felt you were pushed through the ranks to meet quotas." The barb struck closer than Kate would ever admit. Her promotion to sergeant major had indeed been in process when her final deployment ended with the injury that eventually forced her retirement. The whispers that her earlier promotions had been accelerated to showcase female advancement in combat roles had followed her throughout her career, despite her commendations and combat record. "Think what you want, Wilson," she said, refusing to show how his words affected her. "Your opinion stopped mattering to me a long time ago." She walked away before he could respond, making her way to a quiet corner where she could gather her composure. The encounter had reopened old wounds, the constant need to prove herself, to justify her presence in spaces where some believed she didn't belong. A server passed with a tray of water glasses, and Kate took one gratefully, sipping as she surveyed the room. Her gaze fell on a display near the far wall, photographs chronicling Major Adams' career. Curious, she moved toward it. The collection was impressive. Adams as a young lieutenant in Vietnam, as a captain during Desert Storm, as a major in Afghanistan. Kate paused at a familiar image, a group photo taken outside Kandahar in 2010 during her second tour. She stood at the end of the front row, her face serious beneath her helmet. "He kept that one on his desk, you know," came a voice beside her. Kate turned to find a woman she didn't recognize, perhaps in her 50s, wearing a civilian dress but with the unmistakable bearing of someone familiar with military life. "I'm sorry," Kate said. "That photo from Kandahar." The woman extended her hand. "Catherine Jensen. I was Major Adams' executive officer at Fort Bragg during his final posting." Kate shook her hand. "Catherine Mitchell. I served under the major in Afghanistan." "I know who you are, Master Sergeant," Jensen replied with a small smile. "Your name came up often in the major's office, always with the highest regard." Before Kate could respond, Jensen continued, her voice lower. "You should know, there are some here today who resented that regard. Captain Wilson was particularly vocal about it." "Wilson has never made his opinions a secret," Kate acknowledged. Jensen's expression turned serious. "It went beyond opinion. He actively tried to undermine your reputation, suggesting your commendations were exaggerated and your promotions fast-tracked because of gender considerations." Though the accusations weren't new, hearing them so plainly stated still stung. "And the major?" Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. "Shut it down immediately," Jensen confirmed. "He said if Wilson or anyone else questioned your record, they should join you on patrol through Kandahar province and see how long they lasted." Kate felt a rush of gratitude toward her former commander, mixed with renewed grief at his loss. Major Adams had been one of the few who had judged her solely on her performance, never on her gender or anything else beyond her control. As the reception continued, Kate found herself watching the interactions around her with new awareness. The military, for all its emphasis on unity and teamwork, was still in many ways a collection of tribes. Different generations, different wars, different experiences shaping how each person viewed service and sacrifice. She thought of her upcoming dinner with Colonel Winters and his cryptic comments about things she should know. What had Adams wanted her to know, and why had he never told her himself? As Kate prepared to leave the reception, she spotted Frank Donnelly sitting with a group of Vietnam veterans, their faces animated as they shared stories. She approached to say goodbye, and Frank rose to his feet with surprising agility. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said warmly, "I wanted to thank you properly for your help today, twice now." "It was nothing," she assured him, "and please call me Kate." Frank smiled. "Nothing," she says, "standing up to authority never feels like nothing at the time, does it?" Kate returned his smile, recognizing the understanding in his eyes. "No, I suppose it doesn't." "You know," Frank continued, "when I served with Adams in Vietnam, female soldiers weren't allowed in combat roles. Times change, thank God. But one thing doesn't. Good soldiers recognize other good soldiers, regardless of anything else." He extended his hand, and Kate shook it firmly. "It was an honor to meet you, Frank." "Likewise, Kate, take care of yourself. And remember, old soldiers like us, we carry our wars with us long after they're over. The trick is not letting them define us." As Kate drove toward her dinner meeting with Colonel Winters, Frank's words echoed in her mind. She had indeed carried her wars with her, in her memories, in her nightmares, in the titanium rod in her leg that ached when storms approached. But had she let them define her? Had she allowed others' perceptions to shape how she viewed her own service? These questions followed her as she navigated through the early evening traffic, unaware that the answers awaited her, along with revelations that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her military career and the man they had laid to rest that day. The restaurant Colonel Winters had chosen was an understated establishment in Alexandria, the kind of place frequented by Pentagon officials and political staffers seeking discretion along with their dinner. The maitre d' led Kate to a private dining room at the back, where Winters was already waiting. "Thank you for coming, Master Sergeant," he said, rising to greet her. "Of course, sir," Kate replied, nodding that he had changed from his dress uniform to civilian attire, a crisp button-down shirt and slacks that still somehow conveyed military precision. Once they were seated and had ordered, Winters got straight to the point. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here." Kate nodded. "You mentioned something about Major Adams and my service record." Winters reached for his briefcase, removing a sealed envelope. "2 days before his heart attack, Robert asked me to have dinner with him. He gave me this with instructions to pass it to you if anything happened to him." He slid the envelope across the table. Kate's name was written on it in Adams' distinctive handwriting. "Did he know he was ill?" Kate asked, not yet touching the envelope. "He'd had some warning signs, apparently, nothing definitive but enough to make him put certain affairs in order." Winter's expression softened slightly. "Robert was always thorough that way." Kate finally picked up the envelope, feeling its weight, several pages at least. "Do you know what's in it?" "He didn't share the specifics," Winters replied, "but I know it relates to Operation North Star." Kate's breath caught. Operation North Star had been a classified mission during her second Afghanistan tour, a high-risk operation to extract an intelligence asset from a Taliban-controlled village. The mission had gone sideways when their unit was ambushed, resulting in casualties and a harrowing 18-hour firefight before extraction. Kate had been wounded and received a Silver Star for her actions under fire, but the operation had always been discussed in carefully sanitized terms in official records due to its classified nature. "Why would he want to revisit North Star after all this time?" Kate asked, her voice carefully neutral. Winters studied her for a moment before answering. "Because the official record doesn't tell the whole story, and because certain individuals have worked very hard to ensure it never does." Kate's mind immediately went to Wilson, who had been peripherally involved in the operations planning though not on the ground during execution. "Wilson," she said aloud. Winters nodded. "Among others, there was considerable resistance to your Silver Star recommendation after North Star. Not because you hadn't earned it, you had, and then some, but because recognizing your role meant acknowledging certain failures in intelligence and command decisions." Kate felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same sensation she experienced when thinking about that day. The chaos, the screams of wounded soldiers, the weight of responsibility as she took command when their lieutenant fell in the first volley. "Major Adams fought for that commendation," Winters continued. "He went directly to General Marshall, bypassing the normal chain of command. It caused quite the stir at headquarters." This was news to Kate. She had known there had been some delay in processing her commendation, but had assumed it was due to the classified nature of the operation. The envelope contains Robert's personal account of what happened behind the scenes, Winters explained. Along with documentation he preserved, emails, meeting notes, the original after-action reports before they were edited for the official record. Kate stared at the envelope with new understanding. Why now? Why didn't he tell me this himself? Robert believed in the chain of command and the integrity of the service, Winters said carefully. He fought his battles within the system, but he also believed in justice and in making sure credit was given where due. My guess is he wanted you to have this information but hoped it would never be necessary to share it. Their conversation paused as the server brought their meals. When they were alone again, Kate asked the question that had been forming in her mind. What am I supposed to do with this information, sir? Winters cut into his steak methodically. That's entirely up to you, Catherine. You could read it and put it away, knowing privately what really happened. Or I could use it, Kate finished for him. But to what end? I'm retired now. The mission was years ago. True, Winters acknowledged. But there's one detail you should know before you decide. He set down his utensils, his expression grave. Wilson is being considered for promotion to major with assignment to the War College faculty. He would be teaching leadership and ethics to the next generation of officers. Kate felt a surge of indignation at the thought of Wilson, who had actively undermined her and apparently others, being rewarded with such a position. The promotion board meets next week, Winters continued. General Marshall is the chair. General Thomas Marshall, the same officer who had approved her Silver Star on Adams' recommendation. The implication was clear. The contents of the envelope might be relevant to Wilson's promotion consideration. I'm not comfortable interfering in promotion decisions, Kate said carefully. Nor would Robert have wanted you to, Winters agreed. But he believed in truth, even difficult truth, especially when it impacts the future leadership of the Army. They finished their meal with lighter conversation, sharing memories of Adams and catching up on mutual acquaintances. As they parted outside the restaurant, Winters clasped her hand firmly. Whatever you decide, Catherine, know that you earned every commendation and promotion. Your service record speaks for itself, regardless of what anyone like Wilson might insinuate. Back in her hotel room, Kate sat on the edge of the bed, turning the still unopened envelope in her hands. Part of her wanted to leave it sealed, to let the past remain in the past. She had made her peace with many aspects of her service, including the knowledge that some would always view her accomplishments through the distorting lens of gender politics. But another part of her, the soldier who had lived by the values of duty, honor, and integrity, needed to know the truth, even if it was only for herself. Taking a deep breath, she broke the seal. Inside were several documents, topped by a letter handwritten on Adam's personal stationery. Kate began to read, immediately recognizing his direct, no-nonsense style. Catherine, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer around to tell you in person what should have been said years ago. I've asked James to deliver this to you because I trust him implicitly, as I have always trusted you. Enclosed, you'll find my personal records regarding Operation North Star and the events that followed. I want you to know the full truth about what happened, not just on the ground in Afghanistan, but in the offices and meeting rooms afterward, where different kinds of battles were fought. The official record states that you received the Silver Star for taking command after Lieutenant Parker was wounded, establishing a defensive perimeter and coordinating the evacuation of casualties while under heavy enemy fire. All true, but incomplete. What the record doesn't show is that the intelligence failure that led to the ambush was preventable. Captain Wilson, then serving as intelligence liaison, dismissed intelligence from local sources' warning of the ambush, considering it unreliable because it came from a female informant. His exact words in the planning meeting were, "With all due respect, sir, we can't base operational decisions on the gossip of some local woman." This critical oversight was deliberately omitted from the final reports to protect certain careers. When I recommended you for the Silver Star, Wilson and several others argued against it, suggesting that recognizing your actions would invite scrutiny of the operation's planning failures. I took the matter directly to General Marshall, who reviewed the unedited reports and approved the commendation despite significant pressure. In doing so, I made enemies for both of us. I've carried the weight of this incomplete truth for years, believing that preserving unit cohesion and respecting the chain of command were paramount. I now question that decision. Leadership isn't just about what we do in the field. It's also about ensuring that the values we fight for are reflected in how we treat each other and in the institutions we serve. What you do with this information is your choice. I have no specific action to recommend, only that you decide based on the same integrity and courage you've demonstrated throughout your service. It has been one of the greatest honors of my career to serve with you. Respectfully, Robert Adams, Major, U.S. Army. Kate set the letter down, emotions warring within her. Vindication that her suspicions about Wilson had been correct, anger at the deliberate suppression of information, and a profound gratitude toward Adams for his behind-the-scenes advocacy. The remaining documents confirmed everything in Adams' letter: unedited meeting notes, the original after-action reports, and email exchanges discussing how to streamline the official record to focus on the mission outcome rather than the intelligence failures that preceded it. One email from Wilson to the operations commander particularly stood out. While Sergeant Mitchell's actions in the field were commendable, highlighting them with a Silver Star recommendation raises questions about why she was forced to take command in the first place. I recommend a more moderate recognition to avoid unwanted scrutiny of the operations planning phase. Kate spent hours reviewing the documents, piecing together the full story of what had happened. By the time she finally went to bed, dawn was breaking over Arlington, and she had made her decision about what to do next. The following morning, Kate drove to Fort Myer, adjacent to Arlington Cemetery, where General Marshall maintained an office. She had no appointment and only a slim hope that he would see her, but she had to try. At the headquarters building, she approached the front desk with confidence born from years of navigating military bureaucracy. "Master Sergeant Catherine Mitchell to see General Marshall," she stated, presenting her military ID. "I don't have an appointment, but the matter concerns Operation North Star." The mention of the classified operation had the desired effect. After several phone calls and a 30-minute wait, she was escorted to the general's office on the top floor. General Thomas Marshall was a legend in Army circles, a decorated combat veteran who had risen through the ranks based on merit and leadership rather than political connections. Now in his early 60s, he still maintained the physical discipline of a frontline soldier. "Master Sergeant Mitchell," he greeted her, rising from behind his desk. "This is unexpected." "Thank you for seeing me, sir," Kate replied. "I apologize for arriving without an appointment." Marshall gestured to a chair. "When my aide mentioned Operation North Star, I made time. That operation has been on my mind recently, as it happens." Kate carefully placed Adams' envelope on the desk between them. "I believe I know why, sir. Major Adams left these documents for me after his death. They concern the operation and its aftermath." Marshall's expression remained neutral, as Kate explained the contents of the envelope and what they revealed about Wilson's actions both before and after the mission. "And why have you brought these to me, Sergeant?" he asked when she had finished. "Because I understand you're chairing the promotion board that will consider Captain Wilson next week," Kate replied directly. "And because I believe integrity matters in leadership positions, especially those involving the education of future officers." Marshall studied her for a long moment. "You realize that using these documents could be seen as a personal vendetta against an officer who has clearly made his opinions of you known." "Yes, sir," Kate acknowledged. "Which is why I'm not using them at all. I'm providing information that Major Adams believed was important enough to preserve and pass on. What you do with that information is entirely your decision." A ghost of a smile touched Marshall's face. "Neatly done, Sergeant, passing the moral dilemma up the chain of command." "Not my intention, sir," Kate responded honestly. "But I do believe that decisions about who leads and teaches our next generation of officers should be made with complete information." Marshall picked up the envelope. "I'll review these documents personally. Beyond that, I can promise nothing." "That's all I'm asking for, sir." As Kate rose to leave, Marshall asked one final question. "If Wilson is passed over for promotion based on this information, he'll likely suspect your involvement. Are you prepared for those consequences?" Kate met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, I've dealt with worse than Captain Wilson's resentment. The truth matters more than his opinion of me. As she drove back to Mapleton later that day, Kate felt a weight lifted from her shoulders, not because she had taken action against Wilson, but because she had honored the trust that Major Adams had placed in her and the values they had both served. What she couldn't know was that the ripples from her decision would spread further than she imagined, culminating in an event that would bring her full circle, back to Arlington, where the truth would finally be spoken aloud for all to hear. 6 months passed. Winter settled over Mapleton, bringing short days and long nights that Kate filled with volunteer work at the local Veterans Center and occasional consulting for a defense contractor that valued her expertise in field operations. She heard nothing from General Marshall or about Captain Wilson's promotion board, which was expected. Military personnel matters were handled with appropriate discretion, especially when they involved potentially embarrassing revelations. On a snowy December morning, Kate was clearing her driveway when a car pulled up, a government sedan with military plates. A young corporal stepped out, saluted crisply despite the civilian setting, and handed her an official envelope. Master Sergeant Mitchell, General Marshall sends his compliments and requests your presence at a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery next Friday at 1000 hours. What ceremony? Kate asked, puzzled. I'm not briefed on the details, ma'am, the corporal replied. The invitation contains all the information. After he departed, Kate opened the envelope to find a formal invitation to a memorial rededication ceremony honoring the fallen from Operation North Star. The brief note mentioned that transportation would be provided if required and requested confirmation of her attendance. Curious and somewhat concerned, Kate immediately called Colonel Winters, who she suspected might know more. James, she said when he answered, dispensing with formalities given their recent communication, I've just received an invitation to some kind of ceremony at Arlington for Operation North Star. Do you know anything about this? There was a pause before Winters replied. I received the same invitation. From what I understand, General Marshall has ordered a review of several operations where full recognition may have been inadequate. North Star is among them. Because of the documents, Kate surmised. Partially, Winters confirmed. But there's more to it. After reviewing Adams' materials, Marshall apparently initiated a broader examination of how certain operations were documented and how commendations were processed. It's created quite a stir at the Pentagon. And Wilson, Kate couldn't help asking. Another pause. Reassigned to Fort Irwin, training role but not at the War College, that's all I know. After hanging up, Kate stared at the invitation, unsure how to feel. She hadn't sought recognition or correction of the record for herself. Her motivation had been to ensure that leadership positions were filled by those with integrity. This ceremony, whatever its purpose, seemed to be taking matters in an unexpected direction. The following Friday found Kate once again in her dress uniform, this time seated among a small gathering at Arlington. The ceremony was being held near the graves of the 3 soldiers who had fallen during Operation North Star. A temporary podium had been set up, with the American flag and the Army standard positioned behind it. Kate recognized many faces in the small crowd, officers and enlisted personnel who had been part of the operation or its support structure, family members of the fallen, and somewhat surprisingly, Frank Donnelly, the Vietnam veteran she had met at Adams' funeral. He nodded to her from several rows away. General Marshall approached the podium precisely at 1000 hours, his presence commanding immediate attention and respect. Today, he began, we gather not only to honor our fallen comrades, but to ensure that their sacrifice and the actions of those who served alongside them are accurately and completely acknowledged for the historical record. He spoke briefly about the importance of honesty in recording military operations, not just for posterity, but for the integrity of the service itself. Then he turned to the specific purpose of the gathering. Operation North Star, conducted in Afghanistan in 2011, has been subject to a thorough review at my direction. This review has revealed that certain aspects of the operation and the actions of several personnel were not fully documented or recognized at the time. Kate felt a tightening in her chest as Marshall continued, sensing where this was heading. In particular, I want to acknowledge Master Sergeant Catherine Mitchell, whose actions during the operation went beyond what is reflected in her Silver Star citation. "Sergeant Mitchell, would you please join me?" Surprised and somewhat reluctant, Kate rose and made her way to the podium. She stood at attention beside the general, acutely aware of the eyes upon her. The updated record now reflects that Sergeant Mitchell not only took command after Lieutenant Parker was wounded, but did so while herself suffering a significant injury. Furthermore, prior to the operation, she had registered concerns about the intelligence assessment that were regrettably dismissed. Her subsequent actions in the field, establishing a defensive position that held for 18 hours against superior enemy forces, directly saved the lives of 14 wounded personnel. Marshall turned slightly toward her. "It is therefore my privilege to announce that, following this review, Master Sergeant Mitchell has been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, our nation's second highest military decoration, upgrading her previous Silver Star." A murmur ran through the assembled group as an aide stepped forward with a display case containing the medal. Kate stood rigidly at attention, emotions warring within her, pride in the recognition, discomfort at being the center of attention, and a profound sense of vindication that the truth was finally being acknowledged. As Marshall pinned the medal to her uniform, he spoke quietly for her ears only. "Adams would be proud, as am I." When Kate returned to her seat, she noticed something surprising. At the back of the gathering, an elderly man in a wheelchair had arrived, accompanied by an aide in uniform. Though she couldn't see him clearly from her position, something about his presence seemed to command attention from those nearby. General Marshall continued the ceremony, recognizing several other personnel whose contributions had been reassessed, including a posthumous Bronze Star for one of the fallen soldiers whose actions had not been fully documented in the initial reports. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, Marshall addressed the gathering once more. "Before we close, I've been asked to recognize one additional person whose presence honors us today. Though not directly connected to Operation North Star, his insights into the importance of complete and honest recognition of service have been invaluable to our review process." He gestured toward the back of the gathering, where the elderly man in the wheelchair sat. "Ladies and gentlemen, General Samuel Donnelly, former Army Chief of Staff." Kate's head snapped around in surprise, her eyes finding Frank Donnelly, now identified as not just a Vietnam veteran, but one of the most distinguished Army officers of the previous generation. The 4 stars on his aide's uniform cap, carried respectfully beside the wheelchair, confirmed his rank. As murmurs of surprise and respect spread through the gathering, General Donnelly's wheelchair was brought forward. Despite his age and physical frailty, his voice carried clearly when he spoke. "Thank you, General Marshall. I hadn't planned to address this gathering, but there's something I feel compelled to share." His eyes found Kate in the front row. "Master Sergeant Mitchell doesn't know this, but our paths nearly crossed many years ago. Her father, Staff Sergeant William Mitchell, served under my command in Vietnam in 1971. He saved the lives of 3 men in his squad during an ambush near Quang Tri. I recommended him for the Silver Star." Kate felt a shock of recognition at the mention of her father, who had rarely spoken about his service in Vietnam. "That recommendation," Donnelly continued, "was reduced to a Bronze Star by a commander who believed that enlisted personnel from small towns like Mapleton didn't warrant the higher recognition. I never forgot that injustice, or the many others like it I witnessed throughout my career." The entire gathering had fallen completely silent, every eye fixed on the elderly general as he continued. "When I met Master Sergeant Mitchell at Major Adams' funeral, I recognized her name immediately. The daughter of William Mitchell, showing the same courage, both in combat and in standing up for what's right, regardless of the potential cost to herself." Donnelly's gaze swept the assembled group. "Our military is built on values, duty, honor, integrity. Those aren't just words for recruiting posters. They're the standard by which we must measure ourselves and each other, regardless of rank, background, or gender." His voice strengthened as he delivered his final thought. "I've lived long enough to see our military evolve in ways I once thought impossible. What hasn't changed, what must never change, is our commitment to recognizing service and sacrifice honestly and completely, without regard to politics or personal advancement." As General Donnelly finished speaking, no one moved or spoke. The weight of his words, carrying the moral authority of his rank and decades of distinguished service, created a moment of profound silence across the gathering. General Marshall finally broke the stillness. Thank you, General Donnelly, for that powerful reminder of our core values. He paused, then added, "This ceremony is concluded. Please join us for a reception at the Officers' Club." As people began to rise and gather their things, Kate made her way directly to General Donnelly. Standing before his wheelchair, she rendered a perfect salute. "General Donnelly," she said formally, "or should I say Frank?" The elderly general returned her salute with a smile. "Frank is fine, Catherine. I apologize for the small deception at the funeral. Sometimes it's useful to observe without the distraction of rank." "You knew who I was from the beginning," Kate realized. "I did," he confirmed. "I've followed your career from a distance. Your father would be immensely proud, you know." Kate's throat tightened at the mention of her father, who had passed away before seeing her receive her Silver Star. He never mentioned being recommended for a Silver Star. "He wouldn't have," Donnelly replied. "William was never one to dwell on what might have been, but he did write to me once, years later, when you enlisted. He said you had the strength that mattered most, the kind that comes from inside." As they spoke, Kate noticed Captain Wilson standing at the edge of the gathering, watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. When he saw her notice him, he gave a stiff nod of acknowledgement before turning to leave. "Your former colleague doesn't seem pleased with today's proceedings," Donnelly observed, following her gaze. "No, sir, I don't imagine he is," Kate agreed. "But that's his burden to carry, not mine." The reception at the Officers' Club was markedly different from the one following Adam's funeral. Kate found herself approached by officers and enlisted personnel alike, many offering sincere congratulations or sharing their own stories of service in Afghanistan. Colonel Winters joined her as she stood speaking with Alina Adams, who had been invited to the ceremony. "Robert would be so pleased," Alina was saying. "He fought so hard for proper recognition of what happened during that operation." "He was a man of principle," Kate replied. "I wish he could have been here today." "In many ways he was," Winters observed. "His influence made this possible." As the reception continued, Kate found herself drawn into a conversation with several junior officers who asked about her experiences in Afghanistan. She shared what she could, emphasizing the importance of listening to all intelligence sources and trusting the judgment of experienced non-commissioned officers regardless of gender or background. "The battlefield doesn't care about any of those distinctions," she told them. "Only about whether you can do the job and take care of your people." Later, as the gathering began to thin, General Marshall approached her once more. "A word before you leave, Master Sergeant." They stepped onto a quiet terrace overlooking the cemetery grounds, the winter afternoon already fading toward dusk. "I wanted you to know," Marshall said, "that today's ceremony is part of a larger initiative. We're reviewing dozens of operations where recognition may have been affected by, let's call them non-military considerations." "Because of Adam's documents?" Kate asked. "They were the catalyst," Marshall acknowledged. "But the issues they revealed are unfortunately not unique to Operation North Star. General Donnelly has agreed to chair a special review panel examining how commendations are evaluated and approved." He turned to face her directly. "Which brings me to my next point. The panel needs advisors with recent combat experience who understand both the field realities and the administrative processes. Your perspective would be invaluable." Kate blinked in surprise. "Sir, I'm retired." "Technically, you're on the inactive reserve list," Marshall corrected with a small smile. "We can activate you for this specific duty if you're willing. 3 days a month in Washington, reviewing cases and making recommendations." The offer was unexpected but intriguing. A chance to ensure that others received the recognition they deserved, regardless of rank, gender, or background. "I'd be honored, sir," she said finally, "if General Donnelly believes I can contribute." "It was his suggestion," Marshall revealed. "He sees in you the same qualities he valued in your father, integrity and moral courage." As Kate drove back to Mapleton the next day, the Distinguished Service Cross in its case beside her, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her full circle. From a small-town girl fighting for respect in a male-dominated profession to a decorated veteran helping ensure others received the recognition they deserved. Her father had once told her that a soldier's true legacy wasn't measured in medals, but in the lives touched and the values upheld. By that standard, Kate realized, she had built a legacy to be proud of, not despite the challenges and prejudices she had faced, but because she had faced them with the same courage she had shown on the battlefield. The road ahead would bring new challenges, but Kate Mitchell would meet them as she always had, with strength, integrity, and the quiet certainty that doing what was right mattered more than doing what was easy or expected. In Arlington Cemetery, the guards who had once dismissed an elderly man's plea now stood a respectful distance from General Donnelly as he visited the graves of fallen comrades. And in the halls of the Pentagon, the voice of a four-star general continued to echo, reminding all who served of the values that formed the true foundation of military service, values that transcended rank, gender, and time itself.